Good afternoon, everyone. This is the Phantom of the Rubens, and today I am in the workshop of Rollo Whately, who is a distinguished frame restorer, whose work lies in an intersection of material and historical aesthetics. Trained in a meticulous tradition of craftsmanship, he approaches frames not merely as a decorative, but also as an extension of artworks and historical identity. Good afternoon, Rollo.
Hello, Daria. Hello.
I wanted to ask you a bit more about your practice.
Well, you've made it sound very grand in that introduction. I started off by disliking frames, not frames particularly with pictures, but the first things I bought were frames. When I was working for probably Arnold Wiggins a long time ago, I bought a couple of frames and I just loved them. I used to have them on the walls of my flat then. And the great thing about frames is that you can hang on the side of each other. So you can hang three in a space that only one picture takes. So I started collecting frames and gathering them together. And I do have a thing for frames. I just like them.
And do you have any philosophy towards restoration and conservation?
Restoration and consideration are different things. We'll come on to restoration in a minute, perhaps, but for consideration of frames, yes, there is a philosophy, I think. I like things that are authentic frames. So I'm not that keen on, let's say, a 19th century copy of an 18th century style of frame. Those could be really ugly, the kinds of frames you see in shoe shops around shoes, and they're made of plaster or plastic or something. I don't like that kind of frame. I like frames that have an intrinsic quality and probably or possibly an original surface. And I've got a thing about balance. And sometimes a frame has a sort of intrinsic balance to it. And for that, I'll give you a bit of background. Frames are made by anonymous people. We know all about pictures and who they're by. In fact, it's really important who they're by because it determines the value of the picture. But frames are made by anonymous people in anonymous workshops, which come and go. And so there is a chap, perhaps his name was George, or perhaps her name was Daria, and 200 years ago, she was making something that, to the best of her ability, or his ability probably, because workshops were full of men, and they took pride in it, but we don't know who they are. But still, if you look at a Spanish 18th century frame, it can be absolutely beautiful without anything in it. So long before you get to framing a picture or restoring it or anything, it could be beautiful in its own right. And that's one of the first frames I bought was a 17th century English Lely panel silvered frame, and it was just lovely surface. 250 years old, never been touched. And I just like having old things and things, as I say, that haven't been mucked around with. Does that make sense?
Yes. It does. And frames are often seen mistakenly secondary to the pictures by some people. How do you perceive the dialogue between the painting and the frame?
Okay, well, that brings us on to framing pictures, which is another thing. Sometimes the dialogue is a historical one. So, as we were talking about earlier, you might put a Dutch frame on, so a black ebony frame on a Dutch picture. So the dialogue there is a historical one. It's about, this is a Dutch picture, so we're going to put a black frame on it. But the dialogue can also be an aesthetic one. So you might put a French 17th century frame, as I have done, on a Picasso drawing. Because although they don't have that historical congruity, they still work really well together. And Picasso, in fact, while we're on him, there are pictures of him holding Italian 16th century frames because he apparently quite liked them, and he could buy them cheaply probably. So that would be another kind of dialogue, is that it just works well together. And often that's the most exciting part of the job. And often, to be honest, with contemporary and modern pictures, so late 19th century, early 20th century, you can have real fun framing and find something that isn't historically the right date, but just looks amazing and makes the picture sing.
And you've mentioned you first started collecting frames, but was it something that made you come to working with frames, restoring and conserving frames, or was it something else that actually?
No, I started at Wiggins when I needed a job. Soon after my mother had died, so it was a difficult time. And then I worked for Bonhams and did auctions of loads and loads and loads of frames. We had like 15 frame sales a year. Thousands of frames went through my hands. So then I got to learn a lot. And then I worked for John Davis, who makes black frames, sort of trade frames. And then one day I bought a frame on a Saturday from a nice chap in South London, who had a warehouse full of old frames and was a framer. And I bought it for £400 on the Saturday, and I sold it for £1,400 on the Tuesday, to one of my now colleagues. And I thought I only have to do that a few times a month, and I made a living. So that's when I started buying and selling frames. And then we were in a tiny attic to begin with, and then in Bond Street, and then we've been here for about 22 years. So it wasn't a decision. None of these things, I think, are decisions. It was just a meander through, or finding my way through to what I was good at, which is probably, making a bit of money, enough to live on, and I'm quite good with my hands, so I know what to do to things.
And what came first, restoring, conserving the frames, or buying and?
Buying and selling came first. When I was in previous jobs, I did a little bit of finishing. So sometimes the frame would come down from a workshop and need to be delivered to a client, but it wasn't quite the right colour for the client. And that's when I realised that you just need a paintbrush and some common sense, and you can change the way it looks. And that's my strong point now in the workshop downstairs, which you might see in a minute, is to be able to make things look exactly as they should look, looking their best, using techniques like rubbing it or knocking it or distressing it or colouring it or whatever it is, because gold is gold colour, it's quite bright, so it always needs taking down. So, but it was the antiques, because that was my experience, and then finishing. And I'd seen frame workshops, so I knew roughly how they worked.
Can you tell us a bit more about your amazing workshop? You're in St. James Street, Central, but it's a quite, like, you need to know that you're located here in order to find you, and it's so beautiful inside here, so many frames.
Yes, well, I like to think of myself as not a well-kept secret, but I mean, I don't advertise myself much. I started, Daria, mostly working for the trade, for art dealers, mainly almost 100% art dealers. Now it's completely different. Now there's many more private clients. There are museums along the way, but I've never really gone for the museum work. Some of my competitors have, but I haven't gone for the museum work. It was mostly trade, so I didn't need to be public. And the trade knew me, and I knew the trade because I've been working in the art trade already for 10 years by then. And I knew they knew the people, and I could talk their language, and I could give them what they needed, which is often things in a hurry, or they need repairs, or they need, a quick frame, or to borrow a frame to show a client, or whatever it is. So I'm on friendly terms with many people in the trade. So that was how I started. And it's evolved into this workshop, which is, yes, it looks like we've been here for 150 years, but we haven't. We've only been here for 20 years. But when we moved here, we had to take all the carpet up I don't know if you can see this, but and some of these floorboards are new and some are old. We've made the new ones look like old floorboards because we wanted to look as if we've always been here.
No, no, of course, of course. That's, I guess, the feeling you get from being in the workshop. And how many frames pass by your hands on the?
We're on stock number about 8,000 or 9,000. So, some of the stock numbers will have, and we've done about 10 or 15,000 jobs, I think, over the years. And there are about 1,000 frames yet at any one time. It's harder now to buy frames. I used to buy a lot more, but it's harder to buy frames now because Brexit. I bought some frames earlier this week in Paris, the first time since Brexit. I bought frames. They were just in an online sale. They weren't expensive. About £1,200 of frames. The first quote I got for shipping was £1,100. It's crazy because of the import duties and the customs and all the paperwork, and it's a nightmare. So that has had a big impact, as you know, on the London art business. It really has done awful damage. So I'm very cross about Brexit, but we're going to keep going. So I'm not buying as much as I did, but I'm also not as young as I was, and there were far more dealers in the past. For instance, sometimes a dealer would ring you up and say, "I've got a garage full of frames, or we've got a basement full of frames we don't want. Can you come and help us get rid of them?" And that would be great because there'd be a few good ones and a few bad ones. I remember once in an attic in Amsterdam, very, very dusty, very literally thick with dust, these things. I think it was a sort of second generation art dealer in Amsterdam. And that was, dirty work. But that happens much less frequently now because so many dealers have, as the market's contracted, there are so fewer dealers around with, basements full of frames.
And mentioning the basements full of frames, what was your favorite project that you worked in?
Ever? Oh, it's very hard to say. Sometimes things are just very exciting because they come together. And it doesn't have to be an expensive picture. Selling things to museums. We've sold a number of frames to the National Gallery in London. It's nothing to do with me. I just buy these things, and then they might come and see that and say, "Oh, we've got a picture for that." And that happened early on in my career when somebody at the National Gallery, who as long ago retired, found the frame for the sunflowers, the Van Gogh sunflowers, the one that the poor girls who went to prison got through the soup at.
Mm-hmm.
And I sold that frame, the Van Gogh, to the National Gallery, and that was exciting because everyone thinks of and everyone knows that painting. It's I'll tell you another story. It's also on our website about a chap came to me with an Isabey, a 19th century French painting, and he wanted to frame in a hurry. And we used to have a store up in King's Cross in one of the railway arches, and he insisted he was in a real hurry for a frame, and he insisted we went to the store. And we went up to the store and we found a frame, which was, I bought in Paris a couple of weeks ago, a couple of months before, and it was covered in bronze paint, and it was a French fluted hollow. Funnily enough, he bought the painting in Paris about 3 or 4 months ago. And this was the frame for the painting. And the frame had Isabey written on the back, and the nail holes were in exactly the same place. So they were reunited in King's Cross and ended up in an American museum. So that's great fun.
It was meant to be.
Yes, it was meant to be. Yes.
And do you have any sort of dream project or dream that you would love to work on one day?
Going back to what I said at the beginning, I would love there to be a gallery or room in the V&A or something devoted to frames. I think they are really beautiful things in their own right. It's very hard to get anyone to understand that. And all the framers who are now sadly deceased have all said, all I really want to do is get people to buy frames from their own self so that they would look like the walls in here with lots of holes. and such craftsmanship. But I don't think that'll ever happen. But I'd love to see some of my frames end up in a museum, just as frames. But there have been exhibitions of frames. There was an exhibition of Sansovino frames. I don't know if you can see the one behind me. That's called the Sansovino frame. And with an exhibition of those at the National Gallery, which is run now by someone called Peter Sharda, who's very good. And he loves Sansovino frames. He's a carver, so he likes them because they're carved, I think. And they're old. They're Venetian 16th century. It'd be nice to have an exhibition of frames somewhere. But they are very hard to look at. The best way to look at a frame is to feel it. I want to see it on a picture. So, no, I don't think there's a project I've got. A dream project. Poussin. I've only ever framed not very good Poussin. I'd like to frame a really good Poussin. The ones in Dulwich are badly framed. And they are beautiful paintings.
Great project for the future.
Yes, yeah, but they got no money. The problem is, these museums have very little money. American museums have more money, but I don't have much access to American museums.
Yeah, American museums are, I think, always restoring something, reframing, rehanging. There is always
a lot of activity.
Something happening. And do you have any, mentioning reframing, Poussin, do you have any favorite period, country of the frames that...
In the 18th century in France, frame makers were actually controlled by a guild, and often had to put stamps on the back for tax reasons. But the 18th century in France, the craftsmanship was of exceptional quality. If you think of wool furniture or French armchairs, and even frames were made exquisitely. I don't think anyone will ever make furniture or frames as well as the French did in the 18th century, ever again, probably. Having said that, there are Italian frames, which are full of joy and excitement. The French are very controlled and beautifully made. Italian frames can be full of joy and excitement, sometimes not very well made, sometimes not even that square, but they're lovely. English frames, very overlooked. As I said, I bought some frames in Paris earlier this week. One of them was a lovely English Chippendale frame, but the French will not use the word Angleterre. They called it a French style Louis XV. So the great place to buy English frames is Paris, because they just hate it so much. And English frames can be absolutely extraordinary because they're very economical. The French, no economy at all, and they do things incredibly carefully and with various different layers, and everyone would be allowed to do one part of the process, and only English were, like English are, very not slapdash, but just economical. So English swept frames in the 18th century can be just gobsmackingly beautiful. They can do really extraordinary works of craftsmanship. So no, nothing in particular. Dutch frames can be beautiful. Ebony from the East Indies, marvellous wood. They're fantastic craftsmen. So I think it must have been individuals.
And is there any country period of the frame that which is more difficult to restore than the other?
Not really. For restoration, it's always the same process. Essentially, you fill and you match the surface, or you do some cabinet work, which is not what I do at all, and you match the surface. Or if you're adjusting the size of a frame, which we can also do, you make the reductions and adjust the surface to match. It's not... No, I don't think it's not like Italian pictures would go to an Italian paintings conservator, who specializes in Italian paintings, and Dutch would go to somebody who's good at Dutch panels. No, it's not quite like that. I don't think.
Understood. And how does we touched a bit on the process of restoration. How can you talk us a bit more through the process? How does it really work? For example, how does adjusting the frame would work, or gilding the frame would work?
Well, let's say you had a French painting and I had a French frame that didn't quite fit for one reason or another. It would go off to a cabinet maker and be adjusted. They would do complicated things. Often a frame might be taken into not just 4 parts for each side, but 8 or even 16 parts to take the corners and the centers off, because often frames are centered. So they go out from the center to the corners and down to the center again. So you go to a cabinet maker first, and then you do some gesso work or putty work to fill the cracks to make it good. And then you prepare it and gild it, and then you'd finish the toning of the gold to match the original. Gold's quite forgiving. Gold leaf is quite forgiving. But it can take a long time. It can be very time consuming work. Sometimes frames frames are carved wood mainly, with gesso on top. And then clay, which is that red color normally we sort of normally see, and then gold, and then a patina. Sometimes the gesso can get damaged by damp. Damp is the big enemy of frames. They can withstand sunlight in a way that pictures can't, but they can't withstand damp, because the damp gets into the gesso, and in English we call it's shot. It's gone. The glue's gone out of it, and it's just a crumbler. If you've got a crumbler in your hand, or a frame that's very woodwormy, then you have to do some considerable work to consolidate the gesso or the wood, if it's woodworm, and make it stable enough to go on in its life as a frame.
And this process would take how long?
Normal restoration, 3 or 4 weeks, depends how big it is and what damage is. Small repairs can be done very easily, and if someone's watching this and they've got a few chips in their frame, just don't put gold paint on it, put a little bit of watercolor on it, and as soon as you don't see the chip, as soon as it's not obvious and white, then you won't see it, and your eyes will move on to something else and it'll be gone. So it's a lot of magic, and sometimes if you've got an old frame which is all dusty, if you just turn it the other way up, the dust is in shadow then, and you don't see it, and it all looks new again. We do that often. And the client says, how'd you do that? And we said, we just turned it upside down. We send them a bill for £200 and it works fine.
And so I guess it's case by case. There is no one thing how you would no rule how.
There's no rule how to do things. If I can't do something, then I know lots of people who can. And in London, we're lucky to have lots of men and women who are often very small workshops, often on their own, who can do amazing things. There are some amazing craftsmen in London.
And talking about craft, would you have a usual day, like a day of a frame restoring or there is no usual day for you?
Day?
Yeah, no, in a workshop, like you would start by.
Oh, I see. Oh, the normal day. Well, I normally come in and I take about 2 hours to warm up and I have 2 cups of coffee. We put some glue on a Monday morning. So a lot of some of the work we do is here anyway. We have rabbit skin glue, which is an animal glue. So that needs soaking and preparing. I keep the workshop downstairs, quite tidy. I don't like too much mess, although it looks messy, sometimes, but everything, I know where it is. So you've got to be clean and tidy, because sometimes pictures are coming here which are both fragile and valuable. I mean, really valuable. Sometimes millions of pounds worth of picture might come in to be fitted or something, and then you've got to be very careful. So it's important that although it looks like a Dickensian shop, and it can be a bit messy, that everything is in order. There are places where you're not allowed to put liquids. There are places where you only put this, and you don't leave things on the ground in case it's a flood at night, and all those things. So you have to have lots of experience. As the day goes, no, there's no normal day. If the day could be taken over as we experienced it today, by an auction, or it can be taken over by someone coming in, or it can be taken over by just me working downstairs on, if it's a quiet day, a Friday or Monday, I might be downstairs just working on things with some music on. So there's no normal day. And it's my shop, so I don't have to come in every day even now. So
Any particular type of music, classic?
sometimes classical, so yes. Yes, they were listening to Shostakovich piano preludes, but the week before it was something else.
No, nice. And how many projects do you would be usually ongoing at the same time?
That's changed since COVID. Pre-COVID, it was 40 or 50, and now it's more like 30.
Oh, you need a very good discipline, I guess, too.
You got to keep all those balls in the air, yeah. But things are out, different workshops, and perhaps a frame's being made in one place, and it'll come back finishing, or it's being made in one place, come back finished, but we're waiting for a mount or a mat to come from the mat maker, and then we've got to order some Optium in is a perspex from somewhere else, or we're doing a job at the moment where we want some antique mirror glass. Well, that's coming from the antique mirror glass supplier in Norfolk, and they'll send the glass and it'll arrive in a couple of weeks, and we'll put those into the frames, which are going to San Francisco. So there's a lot of, pulling things together. And I know lots of people, as I said earlier, that are really good at their jobs, in London. So, and we have a great guy with a car who drives things around. And so that's what I do, is glue things together a bit and make sure that everything goes out looking perfect.
So you're sort of I might put it, the boss of this big operation.
Well, I'm not the boss of the operation. They're all their own bosses, which is great, because I think then people are able to control their own lives. And I'm happy for that to be the case.
Of course. And was there, is there any seasonal sort of...
We've just done freeze. So we did a few things for Freeze Masters, not many, but enough to keep us busy. And being so small doesn't need to be a lot to keep me busy. Yes, there is a season. There's the build up to Maastricht, and there's a quieter time in the summer. And there are the auctions. But now, as I said earlier, that with more private clients, there's much less of that seasonal flow. Because the seasonal flow was much more to do with the trade, for fairs and for auctions and for the summer season. Well, that doesn't really exist anymore. So, yes, there's freeze and there's Maastricht, but the July thing doesn't seem to be there in the same way it was now that Masterpiece has gone and Grosvenor House and all those big fairs. So it's not as seasonal as it was, is the answer to that question. But January, we will be busy, I hope. Fingers crossed.
And what was the oldest frame that you've restored?
The oldest frame, probably early 16th century. Possibly late 15th century. I don't know if we've ever had anything really, really old like you'd find in the National Gallery or something. And I would be careful to do restoration on those. I think I might probably not do that myself. I'd give that to someone who is more specialised than I am.
And was there any project in the past that still resonates with you today that you have done?
We once did, I don't know why I can think of it. We once did, just before Christmas one year, we did a whole 24 or 30 of the Vollard suite by Picasso prints. And the frames were made in one place and finished by someone else who did a fantastic job. And I remember that job because it was a really good profit and it was great fun. And there were 30 of them to fit, and we all stayed late and fitted them. It was things like that in the old days when we got big groups in, and there were perhaps more people here then. And it was fun. It's a bit less fun now. But we did have fun in the old days. So yeah, I still think of those as the good times.
Of course, it has the basically modern ways of people seeing the pictures change the way they perceive the frames.
Oh, yes. Partly because 20 years ago, there was no internet. So people had to come in and look at things. And they did. Now, they send me an email saying, can you suggest some frames for this picture? Which is in New York or wherever it is. And you suggest frames and they say, we'll go for number 3. And you do number 3 and someone's given you sizes and you never see it with a picture. So that's one way it's changed. The other way is that I did notice that sometimes people come in here and if they do come in here, they look at, it hadn't happened so much recently, but about 4 or 5 years ago, we put something on the floor, the picture, and put a frame on top of it, and they look at it through their phone. Because that's the only way that people can see things, was through the sort of Instagram lens. And I thought that was bizarre. But the internet has changed everything. It's changed everything. I mean, people can buy frames at auctions that in the past I would have known about, or me and the trade. Now it's all very public, which is good. But it's also changed the way that the art market, our business operates. And clients can choose from their phone. Things that, so you have to be very careful to make sure that you give them exactly the right choices. And I guess that's why they keep coming back, because they're relying on your taste, because really you can't see on a phone. You just can't see. You can't see color, balance, the surface. None of it makes sense on a flat image with the light coming from behind. So, I hope that's why they keep coming back, is because we get it right. And so when they do see the actual picture in New York or London or wherever it is, it looks really good. And they think, oh, that turned out right. And don't realize how much thought and care has gone into it, because all they did was see it on their phone. When we buy things on Amazon, you get your package through and you're often very disappointed. I hope my customers aren't as disappointed as I am when I buy things on Amazon. And it's about this big when you expect it to be this big, or it doesn't fit, or, so it has changed a lot.
And also, I wanted to ask you more about restoration, conservation, also new methods. I remembered you mentioned the rabbit glue, but are there any new methods of restoration and
There
conservation?
are absolutely pretty much new methods of restoration. The way we gild is the way people have gilded for hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Mhm.
The ancient Egyptians used gold leaf. The Romans used gold leaf, and gold leaf has been applied in the same way since the Quattrocento in Europe, and we use exactly the same materials. We use Italian gesso if it's an Italian frame. We use the same glues. We use the same pigments, and I like that very much. There's very few examples of modern alkyds and chemical finishes, but mostly it's just pigment and glue.
And is there any difference in the tradition depending on the location of the frame and the way how gilding was done?
I'm sure there is, Daria. Yes. As I said, the French craftsmen, the French workshops were very regimented. Italians were much more, if you read Cennini, he says, say a prayer before you mix your glue. Say a Hail Mary, because, that'll make the glue better. So the Italians might have a different way of doing it, in the 15th, 16th centuries than the French in the 18th centuries, but it's all essentially the same. And craftsmen, I've just tracked back a bit. Frames are often completely untouched.
Yeah.
Paintings are very rarely untouched. Furniture is very rarely untouched. Frames are often completely as they were made. They've never been cleaned or altered. They're just 400 years old, never been touched, which is very, very unusual in the world of antiques and paintings. So, and they were made by great craftsmen, really lovely, really good craftsmen. So, that's what's exciting about frames, is they can be very original.
And how does one decide to intervene when you would?
Well, if you want to keep it alive, as I used that expression earlier, to keep a frame going, then you might have to do something to it. You might have to consolidate it if it's got woodworm. you might have to repair broken gesso, but you try to do it with the minimum intervention. But on the other hand, to be honest, I'm a business, and if I've got a frame that I don't mind reducing in size, and someone's got a painting which suits the frame very well, then I'll cut the frame down. So I'm doing, elective damage to something, but then is it better reduced in size and repaired and actually on a picture, or just sitting here in my racks? And I reckon sometimes it's better off to being used again. Because remember, you have to think, all the frames around us here were made for paintings once.
Of course.
They've been taken off paintings by people and replaced by something else. So it's just like a merry-go-round. They're all just going round and round in circles. So I don't really mind being part of that.
And what is the main factor, in your opinion, that affects the frame's longevity?
How well it's made. Yeah, the care with which it's made. And attention to detail, which is something I haven't mentioned before, is something I pay particular attention to detail. It's very important to pay attention to detail. And if something is sloppily done, it won't last, which is good. And if something's well made, it will last. And that's all you can say about it. As long as it hasn't got damp, if it's well made and well looked after, it'll last forever. Gold leaf doesn't change. That's why they use it. It looks expensive, but it also doesn't tarnish or oxidize at all, and is very, very stable. And the rabbit skin, the animal glues used in framing are incredibly stable. Wood can be very, very stable. So frames can last for hundreds of years. And
what do you think, what are the qualities a person should possess? What are the main qualities for someone to work with the frames, to restore them, to conserve them, to...
Well, that's a very good question. I don't know, because I think they just need to find the frame world on their own. You have to have attention to detail, but not an over attention to detail. You have to have eyes in your head, and you have to be prepared to make mistakes, to learn, because the only way you can learn is not really by going to school, but by making mistakes, like everything else. You just have to learn and be able to take on board different solvents, different ways of achieving a result. So you've got to be quite practical and got to have eyes in your head, I suppose, is the answer to the question.
And as I have seen this lovely young gentleman who is now working for you and learning from you, and you've mentioned you've taken students before, which I believe is an amazing thing, being able to teach someone else, someone new. Can you tell us a bit more about it, about the process of teaching? How does...
Very seldom do people come to me looking for work, summer jobs or anything. But when they do, I always say yes. Because I'm very happy to anyone who wants to join in. I know how difficult it is to find a life and a career and a job. So anyone who asks, yes. We had somebody in the summer called Amy. We've had Wilfred, who we might see in a moment downstairs. It takes a very long time to learn. But I will say that Boris, who was here for 10 or 12 years, was at Portrait Christie's. He worked at Christie's South Cam when it still existed. And he came here, and now he went on to do a wood carving course, and now he runs his own workshop. And so he's launched, and I work with him still. And another guy, Spencer, who I work with, used to work for me. So I'm very happy if that happens. I'm very open. Some craftsmen keep their arm around their homework. You remember, like the girls in school, you did their homework like that. Other people, I'm very happy to share everything I know, because I can't, it's not mine.
And we've mentioned it before, but I just wanted to ask it also for our lovely viewers that there are quite a few, as you said, places where one can learn the craft of restoration conservation, but actually one learns more from another restorer, conserver. Can you tell us a bit more?
I think, I mean, there's the City and Guilds does a course, I think, in conserving carving, I think frame conservation. It is important, and especially for museum work, to learn how to do that by the book. But I think if you really want to work in the commercial world, the best place is to learn in a workshop. In the old days, I say the old days, in the beginning of the 20th century, there were huge frame workshops with 20 or 30 people working there. And if you were an apprentice, you spent the first 3 years washing brushes and sweeping the floor before you were anywhere near things. So it was a long process. We can't do that now because I can't afford to have someone here just washing brushes for 3 years. But I do think you can learn the most by being in a workshop and seeing and having different jobs to do. Doing repairs is a really good way of learning. When someone gives you something that's broken, I think I learned a lot by doing repairs. And you have to cast a bit of composition motif, or you have to carve a little tiny bit in, or you have to do some filling with putty or gesso, and then make the surface right. That's when you learn. It's when you actually start digging down into how the thing was made in the first place and trying to replicate that. So the best way of learning is doing repairs.
And what are the advices you can offer or tell someone who wants to become one day frame or restorer?
Just keep looking at frames. Go to the National Gallery, which have really concentrated on frames in the last 15, 20 years. And look at auctions of frames. Come to my shop, go to other places, and just begin to enjoy frames. And I think it's when your eyes are opened to the way things are made and what they look like, then that's a very good way of getting started. There's no specific advice, and I wouldn't encourage anyone to get to devote themselves quite at the moment to the world of frames in London, where the art market's changing so rapidly. But there are going to be a lot of changes in the next few years in the business of frames as well, because a lot of us are getting on. So there will be lots of changes, and now's a good time to buy frames.
And how you think the opening of V&A storage, which has a lot of, like, it's quite heavily on showing people furniture and various frames as well, and also it has the restoring conservators working in front of the people. How will it affect, I think, the market and also young people?
I hope it encourages young people, your generation, to look at old things carefully and with pleasure. I've got younger children, and they do spend a lot of time on screens, and I think even your generation spend a lot of time looking at screens. There is a world beyond the screens, and it is a world of things which are three-dimensional, and you can pick up and you can mend and you can use. And I do hope that the V&A in the east part of London, which I haven't actually visited yet, encourages people and makes people, I keep saying this, open your eyes and look around you and see what things are like. Look at buildings, look at architecture, and look at pictures and frames.
Of course. And of course, and finally, after so many years being devoted to this lovely craft, what keeps your passion, what sustains it, what inspires you every
What inspires me? Well, that's two different questions. What keeps me going is I've got 1,000 picture frames here, and no one else is going to sell them except me. So I've got to come into work. What keeps me going is I still like it, as you can tell. And I still got a sense of humor about frames. I'm still learning, Daria. I'm still learning different ways of doing things. And as Wolf will show you, I'll tell you, I'm still excited when I get I've got an itch up my sleeve. to make something look better than I've ever been able to make it look before. So that's still fun. It's fun. I mean, doing this is fun, and buying things is fun, and rescuing things is fun, and selling things is fun. So now I'm still here for a while. But yeah, that's what keeps me coming in. Nowhere else to go. Somebody rang up and they wanted a box to display jewellery in, and I happen to have this box, and she's been a client for a long time. And we're just doing, Wilfred's doing some repairs. This is Wilfred, and he's just doing some repairs to some gesso damage. So we filled it, and he's going to put some silver leaf on it, because this is silver. Sometimes frames are made out of silver rather than gold, and the silver would sometimes be lacquered, partly to stop it oxidizing and going black, and partly to make it a goldy colour. So you can make silver look like gold by putting a yellow varnish on it, and it was cheaper.
Thank you, Rollo, so much. And we are again here at the Rollo's workshop at 41 St. James's Place, and yeah, just an amazing frame workshop. So please, if you're in St. James, or if you're in London, or just if you need a frame, that's the best place to go.
Yeah, good coffee machine too.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rollo.
Not at all.